Hi everyone, just a quick question. Everyone in the room speak Portuguese? No, English then, brilliant. So now is the last table of the day from the conference. Remember that after that we will have an open session about tactical urbanitourism, so you are all invited. Please stay even that it is very warm in this room. And for now, we will start with Ana Beatriz Gonçalves. After that, we will have Claudia Saldin, and we will finish with one colleague from Porto, Claudia Rodrigues. So, Ana, whenever you want.
Agora tá. Foi? Boa tarde, queria agradecer o evento que tá, e parabenizar, que está super interessante, e a diversidade, enfim. O trabalho que eu vou apresentar aqui é o início de uma investigação, bem início mesmo, e que está se encaminhando ainda, que está inserido no projeto Cidades em Mudanças, Processos Participativos em Portugal e no Brasil, pela FCT CAPES. Então, estou ligada à Universidade Federal Fluminense, no programa de pós-graduação em Antropologia no Brasil, e aqui como investigadora visitante pelo CIES. Obrigada. O início da investigação foi junto com uma associação de mamulengueiros e artesãos a associação fica em Glória do Goitá, uma cidade do interior de Pernambuco, e junto com os bonecos de Robertos e Santo Aleixo aqui em Portugal. Então, o objetivo é investigar a circulação desses objetos inseridos dentro de um sistema de classificações que permitam compreender como e de que maneira esses dois teatros de bonecos, os de Mamulengo e os de Robertos, existem e circulam hoje. Vou contextualizar um pouco, porque são duas manifestações artísticas bastante específicas. Então, eu vou começar pelo Mamulengo, que é um teatro de boneco de luva. Os bonecos eles representam loas, que são histórias curtas assim, e já preparadas previamente, e que são passadas oralmente ao longo do tempo. Os personagens têm as suas próprias histórias, enfim. No Mamulengo, esse tipo de teatro de boneco de luva, ele aparece em vários estados do Nordeste. O que eu vou falar fica em Pernambuco, esse é o estado de Pernambuco, e fica na região da Mata Norte, que é um pouquinho interior, né? Esse é o Museu do Mamulengo, que conseguiu o título junto com a Associação de Mamulengueiros em 2010, e fica numa região que é do mercado, um antigo mercado municipal da cidade, fica numa região bastante central. Nessa cidade existem dois importantes mamulengueiros, que são o mestre Zé Divina e o mestre Zé Lopes, que iniciaram o Mamulengo há bastante tempo. E, a partir da associação, surgiu um novo movimento, que é o Mamulengo Nova Geração, que é a ideia de transformar, modificar algumas dessas histórias para poder adaptar a uma realidade mais atual. Então, foram retiradas algumas passagens que eram consideradas um pouco mais machistas, ou com traços homofóbicos, enfim. E isso gerou uma tensão entre os mamulengueiros mais antigos e tradicionais, porque essa adaptação a uma nova realidade, a uma nova dinâmica, né, é entendida também como uma alteração da tradição. Então, ao mesmo tempo, um desses mamulengueiros é um patrimônio vivo, que é um título do governo do estado de Pernambuco. Então, ele que garante uma legitimidade a ele, né, de ter essa capacidade, ele ser o tradição, né, e ele é o patrimônio, não é só o que ele faz, mas é a sabedoria dele, o conhecimento dele. Então, isso acabou gerando uma série de conflitos entre essa coisa do tradicional, do discurso tradicional, e das modificações que estão sendo feitas por um grupo mais novo. Enfim, agora, mais ou menos é isso que aparece. Vou falar rápido, porque senão não vai dar muito tempo, mas enfim. Já em função comecei a fazer essa pesquisa lá, então aparecia essa disputa, né, do tradicional e sendo legitimada por uma ideia, por esse título de patrimônio vivo, e ao mesmo tempo uma associação nova, né, de pessoas novas se associando, fazendo várias ligações e participando de editais e de projetos para conseguir existir, né, ali, enfim, e estão num espaço bastante central, enfim. Então, o que tem aparecido nessa pesquisa é a questão do associativismo como forma de manutenção e essas disputas. Com a vinda para Portugal, comecei a pesquisar teatros de bonecos e que tivessem algum contexto próximo a isso, e descobri o Teatro de Dom Roberto, que é um teatro também de boneco de luva, e que tem uma estrutura bastante parecida. Eu descobri a partir do Museu da Marioneta, que fica em Lisboa. Fica aqui em Lisboa, no bairro de Santos, e tem um inventariado de patrimonialização dos Robertos, né, pedido pelo Museu da Marioneta. Bom, quando eu cheguei aqui, a primeira surpresa que eu tive é que quase ninguém conhecia o Teatro de Dom Roberto. Pouquíssimas pessoas conheciam, e é um teatro que acabou, não acontece mais, não existe. Enfim, no Museu da Marioneta tem essa é a entrada do Museu da Marioneta. No Museu da Marioneta tem uma sessão bastante grande sobre o Teatro de Robertos. A partir dessa sessão sobre o Teatro de Robertos, é interessante que você percebe, tem junto com os bonecos a história dos bonecreiros, quem eram os que manipulavam na década de 70, a história de cada um deles, das famílias e tudo mais. E, enfim, mas para fora do museu eu não consegui encontrar, até que eu descobri que algumas pessoas consegui o contato de alguns bonecreiros que trabalham com Robertos hoje, consegui assistir algumas apresentações, e, enfim, e hoje são cerca de 13 bonecreiros, assim, 13 pessoas que apresentam os Robertos em Portugal. E aí tem Lisboa, Porto, enfim. E aí é interessante notar que as conversas que eu tive com eles e com a diretora do Museu da Marioneta é que o processo de patrimonialização ele ainda foi pedido como patrimônio imaterial nacional e que ainda não teve resposta, mas que o processo de salvaguarda, de levantamento de documentos, de fazer um vídeo sobre, enfim, tudo isso permitia um diálogo e uma abertura muito maior desses bonecreiros, de espaço de diálogo entre eles, de discussões sobre as narrativas em torno dos Robertos. Há cerca de 4 anos, alguns atores começaram a fazer também o teatro de Robertos. Hoje é possível, ao longo desse mês, está tendo a apresentação de Robertos em Sintra. Enfim, então a ideia é de uma retomada. Então, de toda maneira, o período que eu estou aqui é curto. Eu acabei conhecendo os bonecos de Santo Aleixo também, que são bonecos que hoje estão em Évora, e a pesquisa acabou caminhando por aí, pela questão do associativismo e tudo mais. E os Robertos, o campo foi ficando complicado, o tempo é curto, tem que voltar para o Brasil, enfim. Mas algumas questões ficaram em relação a isso dos bonecos. E aí, primeiro, algumas coisas que vieram surgiram para serem pensadas, assim, para se refletir sobre. A ideia de pensar, que é da materialidade dentro da antropologia, que é de entender o objeto em relação, sempre. Então, como que esses bonecos, a partir desses bonecos, que o foco não é nos bonecos e no entender lógico também, mas a partir deles, e os processos pelos quais eles passaram ao longo do tempo, revelam sociabilidades e políticas públicas em torno disso, esse circuito deles de estarem na rua, entrarem no museu, do museu voltarem para a rua, e isso ressignifica de várias maneiras as relações entre eles. E a questão da patrimonialização, que já é falada, José Reginaldo Santos Gonçalves é um dos autores que debatem muito sobre isso, como algo completamente contextual. Assim. Pensar a ideia de patrimonialização e as políticas de patrimônio a partir de quem recebe a ação, e não necessariamente da Unesco e do selo em si. Né? A política de patrimonialização, no final das contas, acaba sendo um selo. Mas está para muito além disso e assim, tem implicações cotidianas e que são completamente ambíguas e contextuais. E, enfim, se num espaço ela gera conflitos, no outro ela acabou permitindo um maior diálogo e uma retomada, né, mais de uma determinada manifestação artística, nesse caso, dos Robertos. E é interessante perceber isso, assim, essa questão dos objetos, né, circulando e em relação em contexto social sempre, né, não sozinhos e não como um signo independente, mas como que essas relações e como que se configura isso. E é isso, essas questões que estão sendo levantadas e têm sido pensadas a respeito. Então, pensar esses dois teatros, que eram teatros de rua e que foram parar em museus, tanto no Museu do Mamulengo quanto no Museu da Marioneta, e que acabaram dialogando, né, com essas, enfim, políticas patrimoniais e as mudanças que elas passaram. E pensar isso a partir do objeto e da materialidade, e ponto novamente, objeto em relação, não objeto em si, mas com revelador de sociabilidade, e o associativismo em torno desses. É isso. Obrigada. Deixa eu fechar. Pronto.
So there are people here that don't speak Portuguese, right? Or no? Okay, so I'll do it in English then. Okay. Só apertar aqui, né? My name is Claudia Selding. I'm an architect and urban planner, and I'm a lecturer and postdoc researcher at the program for urbanism, a postgraduate program in urbanism at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my latest research project, which has to do with temporary uses of space through culture. And I hope to be able to present 2 case studies if I have the time. And so, just to give you some context, just to give you some context, can you hear me? Okay. I'm going to talk mainly about the city of Rio de Janeiro, which is where I live and where the university is located. So for those of you who don't know, Rio was the capital of Brazil until the 60s. And the main thing that you have to know about the city is that it's marked by glaring disparities and inequalities. And in the morphology, the urban morphology of the city, this can be perceived by the many favelas around the city. And favelas, for those of you who don't know, are the form of the local slums that we have. And in the city of Rio, we have over 800 of them spread all over the city in both rich and poor areas. So in the most noble of neighborhoods and in the peripheral areas. And in the favelas, we have an inefficiency of the public policies, as well as a lack of infrastructure and of public services like sanitation, and also a lack of basic equipment and facilities, especially of cultural facilities and traditional cultural facilities like museums and theaters and cinemas and cultural centers. So what we see is that the population, the local inhabitants, they have to appropriate space in new ways, and they have to do this by improvising. So I know that temporary use of space is basically something that is a new trend in Europe, and you see this a lot in Germany and in England, and it's kind of a new urban planning trend, and it's used a lot for urban speculation and for economical purposes, but in the Global South, this comes out of necessity, and this is what I want to present to you and to point out, and this is what I'm trying to discover through this research. So in my lab, we've come up with this new concept of trying to give a name to these spaces that are emerging in these peripheral areas through this improvisation. And in Portuguese, we are using the name Espaços Insólitos. And the word insólitos is a very powerful word, but unfortunately we don't have a powerful translation in English. So at first, for this paper, I was using the word unusual, but now I'm using the word unexpected because I think that's a better word. But unfortunately, I was using unusual, so we're stuck with that. So what are these unusual spaces? There are places that are created with no formal urban planning or no formal architectural projects. They are appropriated by the lower classes of the population, often through temporary uses of space. And this population, they changed the original function of these places. And these spaces, they are spaces that are previously forgotten in the landscape. So they can be urban voids, but not the traditional urban voids like industrial sites that are now being transformed into cultural spaces, because that's something that we are already used to. But I'm talking about the obsolete spaces that are adjacent to urban, to transport infrastructure, like the space under flyovers or overpasses, or urban gaps, as I like to call them, spaces that are really obscure in the cities. And this phenomenon that I'm observing, and we are observing in Rio, is very opposite to the, is very contrary to the current trend of urban planning and traditional urban planning that we have been observing for the past 3 or 4 decades, which is the traditional trend of cultural planning. And I'm sorry I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but I assume a lot of you know what this is about. It's the idea of creating an image of the city that you're going to sell so you can attract tourists. So this has been done in places like Barcelona and Bilbao with the Guggenheim Museum. So you take these degraded areas that have been degraded through the industrialization processes and phenomena, and you do urban regeneration projects, but these are central areas, and you turn them into city showcases, and you basically want to attract tourists. And this has been done in Rio very recently through the mega events thing, so the Olympic Games and the World Cup. We had the Wonder Project, the urban operation, the Wonder Rio, Marvelous Rio, or Rio Maravilha, which has been talked about already here. So basically they regenerated some of the portuary area and attracted a lot of tourists, But what they don't tell you is that they evicted a lot of people from the nearby favelas, and basically they marked the houses with those letters you can see there, and sometimes they did that 24 hours before they evicted people. So I would love to talk more about that, but I don't have the time. But this is a traditional way of thinking about urban planning in Rio. Do a cleansing of the places where poverty lives. So I wanted to show you a little bit of the other side of the coin. So I see these temporary uses of spaces as the other side of the coin of this traditional urban planning trends. And so I'm showing you here some examples of these temporary uses that we have been researching in our group. So what we have here is a traveling or pop-up cinemas. There are projection of cinemas onto walls, or pop-up libraries. This is a guy with a tricycle that travels a favela with his tricycles and his, I don't know how to call this, like a cupboard that opens up and becomes a library for children. So, you know, like the square in the favela becomes a library. These girls, they do customization of clothes in the middle of the favela. The group under the girls, they are performing Shakespeare on the slab or on the rooftop of a shack house in the favela, but they adapt the Shakespeare plays, so the opposite families are opposite drug trafficking factions. So I want to these are just some of the cases that we have been researching for the past 14 years in our group that has to deal with cultural, periphery culture. So I want to show you two of these cases. Oh, but before that, I just want to give you some theory and to tell you that what we see is that these groups, they try to seize the occasions in the way that Desserteau talks about when he's talking about tactics, but it's a different way than when we talk about tactical urbanism. I have a bit of a problem with that, with the term tactical urbanism. I don't like it. I don't think it works in the global south and in poor countries, but I'm not going to get into that. But what happens is that these groups, they take on the task of transforming their own reality because the government is not going to do that. And so I take on the concept of loose spaces, which is used by the authors Frank and Stevens, and they say that these loose spaces are the breathing spaces of the city. They are the spaces of exploration, of discovery, of encounter with the unexpected. They are the spaces to break the homogeneous ways of thinking. So I wanted to bring you a little bit of that. So the first case that I'm going to present is in the peripheral neighborhood of Madureira, which is considered to be a commercial and cultural hub. It's the home of 3 of our samba schools. If you don't know what a samba school is, please do your research. I don't have time to explain. It's also a place which the local landscape is marked by transport infrastructure. The neighborhood is cut by a train line that it cuts it into 2 different, completely different sub-neighborhoods, and it's also marked by the presence of flyovers, which is a heritage that we have from our mid-20th century modernist urban planning history, which is very strong. So I use here the term flyover, but in Portuguese we use the term viaduct, which is viaduto, which is the term we use for everything. In other places people might use overpass, so, you know, that would depend. And here you can have an idea of what this main viaduct, which is called Negrão de Lima, looks like. And for decades, this viaduct was used as a car parking by day, you know, the part under the viaduct, and by night it was just the, you know, a place to shelter the homeless. And this part that is closed, it was opened, okay? And in the 90s, a cultural group they were looking for a place to do their activities. They were a musical cultural group, and they couldn't afford to rent any places. And so they decided to occupy this place under the viaduct. And what they did was they invented this new musical rhythm called charme, which is charm. And it is an adaptation of the hip-hop and R&B style in a very Brazilian way. And so they decided to throw weekly parties under this flyover, and they became so successful that in the last decade they got the support from the municipality, and it became a real official cultural space called the Rio Hip Hop Charme Cultural Space. And it became a new reference point to all of the peripheral neighborhoods in Rio and to the towns that make up the Rio metropolitan area. Now, when I talk about the Rio metropolitan area, I'm talking about 12 million people, okay? So it's not, it's a big deal. And Charme, which was made up around this time, the 90s, was considered to be part of the immaterial heritage of Rio by the municipality too. So what is interesting about this place is that it's very ephemeral. By day, it's a dormant place. And on Saturday nights, it becomes a vibrant, living space. So you can see here the relationship between the structure and the people. And I added here a photo of it during the daytime when it's closed. And you can see they enclosed the space. So the bad thing is that they made a public space private, but really it was an unused, a leftover space. So we have to think about, was it harmful to turn it private or not? So just so you can see the relationship between the structure. And it became so successful that other places and other groups, they decided to adopt as an example. So here is an example of the cultural point at the Favela Maré, which is one of the other biggest complex of favelas in Rio. I think this project, I know for sure that has already ended because of funding. They don't have the enough money to keep it going. This is another example of occupation at the City of God, which you may know from the movie. I know that I'm... And I have another example, which I'm not going to present to you, but it's a garbage dump in another favela, which was turned into an urban park and has won awards for design, for creative design. So my final considerations is that these initiatives, they are being able to modify an image of the periphery that has been historically connected to the idea of violence and of absence. So they are turning the idea of absence into the idea of potence, of the potential to create something. And also awakening dormant potential spaces and transforming degraded landscapes and voids and hidden gaps, but through necessity and not necessarily in order to create speculation and to try to achieve economical development. And also they are enabling these people who don't have access to art, culture, and leisure to have access to these things. So I invite you to read the rest of the article, and it's in Portuguese on ResearchGate and Academia, or you can look me up. And also, if you want to know about the cultural planning thing, my book is in the library up here, so thank you very much.
Não estou a ouvir o rato. Ah, ok. É meu favorito. Deve ser aqui. Não, está. Meu fogo. It's a pleasure to be here, 11 or 10 years after the first Young Urban conference. I was here in the first. I was not young there, and I'm still not young, but it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk about the Nocturnal Porto, presenting some fragments of Heterotopia, and this presentation is based on my PhD that I did, that I finished 1 year ago, and it has to do with the boom that the city of Porto observed about the nightlife. I grasped the first years of this boom. So I'm going to present first a little context of my research and my methodology, and then some fragments of Heterotopia. What is urban rhythmography and the nocturnal city? The urban rhythmography, it was a concept that I created based on my methodology and based on the field work. And briefly, it has to do to explore the macro and micro production of the nocturnal city and the everyday or every night life, and how, by urban rhythmography exercise, that has to do with experience and experimentalism. This rhythmography as basis mostly is based on rhythm analysis of Henri Lefebvre, that has to do with to assess to the social organization based on the study of the urban rhythms. And the rhythmography has also to do with phenomenology, with ethnography, with critique of everyday life, with transactionalism, and with grounded theory. I used mostly the field journal, the interview, and rhythmograms. I collect flyers, non-verbal and verbal narratives. I participate in discussion groups, doing participant observation in nightlife, sensing, gathering, walking and staying. That is the main point of rhythmography, has to do with walk and staying in the places and feeling and sensing the places. Wandering in the urban space. So I think urban rhythmography has to do with objective and subjective grasping of urban rhythms. There is a constant movement between macro and micro aspects of nightlife, and then of objective and subjective grasping of the rhythms. So it's a brief presentation, and now the design. The plans and settings of my rhythmography has to do with bohemia, leisure, party, dance, music, gathering, clubbing, cafe, bar, club, and street. And I try to capture rhythmicities, that is the rhythm experience and expression. And the characters that I observe and talk with are the nocturnals, the bohemian, the dweller, the informal production, the informal or formal regulator, and the urban character, and the nocturnal worker. And the plots and scripts were geographic, historical, economic, mediatic, political, social, groupal, cultural, personal, identitary, and communitary. So it's a big it's a big defect to apply this to Nocturnal City, but I think in the end I cannot present here all the results. I'm going to present only some fragments of Heterotopia, but in the end I think I was able to capture the urban rhythms of Porto, and to get to the social organization and to the everyday life that is in base of this nocturnal city. So grasping Nocturnal City, the movements and moments that I have been, has to do with analysis, with exploration, being in the listening points and walking in the streets of the Nocturnal City, and I capture the nightlife of Porto, socio-economical, historical, and urban, and experience contextualization, the nightlife production, regulation, consuming, and experience of the Nocturnal City, and the expressions of the Nocturnal City, going out and the daily life, or nocturnal life. The Nocturnal City is as a dialectical production that has to do with the neoliberal forces and the personal or poetic forces from people and the nocturnals and the bohemians that revert the linear social reproduction that this kind of forces of neoliberal and rationalist forces print in the urban scene. The city at night is being a mark of the cities now, and in Porto it happens this. As the nocturnal city in downtown was growing up, the political there was a appropriation of the political discourse about the city, trying to capture to the urban marketing this kind of renewal of the center of Porto. So there was a lot of mediatization of this nocturnal city in the streets, in the magazines, in maps that previous didn't have the location of the nightlife spot, and now they are territorialized in the maps also. This is the other face of the neoliberal production of the city that has to do with heterotopia. And that heterotopia, I was listening to Claudia, has a lot to do with the unexpected and unusual spaces that you talk, and with the unexpected times that we use also the city. Because I believe that the nocturnal city can be an insolite city also, or an unusual city, besides the neoliberal forces that are production there. And this is the point that I want to stress here, is that this difference and not the linearity of the nocturnal production. So heterotopia has to do with different, alternative, and contra-hegemonic uses of space and time. The word is associated with Michel Foucault, and then, when he talk about heterotopia, it has to do with deviant behavior and with mental health and places of that people with deviant behaviors can be in. So it were places of difference and confined places and monumental places. Now the heterotopia is diffused in the city, and even is appropriated even by the hegemonic power to promote the city, because difference is a trend also in the postmodern city and the post-industrial city. Heterotopia has to do with liminarity, as I said. It defies the social order and the transgression of the social order. There is an alternative and subversive use of the city in the nocturnal use. As I said, the nocturnal city can be considered an unusual space and unusual time. First, because at night we are supposed to be sleeping. So we are, first we are contrariating our natural rhythms. So it's another city. And the time is another time also. And the Nocturnal City have a lot of, have a lot of spaces that are unusual, as such churches that are transforming discos or clubs at gardens. 5 minutes more. Oh. Gardens that are used to techno parties or to rock concerts, and this is Heterotopia. I have here a sentence from my interviews. It's a different time, right? The night time is another time. Night time has a certain aspect to it, funny and magic. The nocturnal lifetime is different, and we dress differently and are more available, right? There are the ingredients that make us go crazy, travel to the other side. That's cool. I'm going to speak this. As heterotopic moments of my work, I choose the street and public space as heterotopia. Heterotopia has a lot to do with public and with common places also. So the street was appropriated in manners that was not before appropriated. I have here a rhythmogram that where I expose the appropriation of the streets and squares in Porto, in the party district that I call. And some photos illustrating this appropriation. And I have here a sentence of Henri Lefebvre that tells that there on the square there is something maritime about rhythms, currents traversing the masses, streams breaking off, which brings or take away new participants. The tide invades the immense square, the withdrawals, flux and reflux. And this I observed in the nightlife. I'm going to pass this. There's a plurality and diversity of public and free open events that has a lot to do with temporary spaces, as Claudia talked before. Pop-up parties and events that the downtown that booms in downtown. There are festive and musical rhythms that has to do with the different and with heterotopy, and I'm choose to tell a sentence about my interviews. Dance is a corporal expression without dubs, a way to express yourself, and then perhaps you are able to. I don't know, it's difficult for me to explain what it is. I feel a lot of pleasure when I'm dancing. We feel satisfied. It's a way of speed our energy. It's joy. So music, there is a plurality and diversity of music and party in the nocturnal city of Porto. And here another rhythmogram that points out the places that play music. So there is a territorialization of the city by music. And now, briefly, the emancipation rhythms. There was, since the April Revolution in Portugal, nocturnal leisure democratization. City and dance floor has always been places of freedom, particularly for women, and the emancipation of identities, orientations, and genders. There is an emancipation that we can observe now about women that play music that is not, it was not so usual before, and we have some examples. Some protests use nightlife to express themselves and to collect money to the protest, and we have here an example of the Slut Walk, that is a global protest. And it has a lot to do with LGBT emancipation, and I have here some flyers that express this, and with queer emancipation also. I'm going to finish. That arrived to Porto in lately 2 years ago, and that are very strong now in the city. So the production of the Natural City are dialectical, neoliberalization of space and urban poiesis and heterotopia vibrate in the Nocturnal City, territorialization process and different territories mark the Nocturnal City, the street, the synesthesia, the senses, the celebration, the communal and the urban emancipation are the nocturnal cities and rhythmographic wonders. Thanks a lot.
Thanks to you all. Thanks to speed up sometimes. We are running out of time, so I would like to ask to the public if you have any question, any comment.
Thank you for all the presentations. And I have a question for Claudia. Seldin, you. And it has to do precisely with the conflict in this word, tactical urbanism. And thinking in the cities of the Global South, we have seen that the plan and the modernist and plan, the colonialist way of planning in the Global South has failed. And I wonder if these kind of interventions, where we are talking about not services, because they are not providing a service that is always there, like if you have a library that is a fixed place that you can go every time that you are there. How these temporary uses can claim for other conditions in the slums, for example. Because if you provide the temporary services or uses, this is what the inhabitants of the slums need, or the state has to provide a lot of more infrastructures and provide services that are essential to their lives. So it's a party essential to the inhabitants of the slums. Where do you begin when urbanism has failed and tactical urbanism has problems? So that's my...
If I understand the question per se, but let's see if
it's
we
kind
can...
of a comment question, but it's,
Yeah, but
the idea is if you believe in...
If the temporary urbanism or tactical urbanism takes the rollout of the state of providing, is that what you're asking?
Yes, it has to do with that.
If I think that that's okay, I don't think that that's okay. I think that the thing is that there is a huge problem, and I also have to clarify that when I talk about the Global South, I can be generic about it because there are many differences, like Australia is in the Global South, and obviously it's a very different situation. But when I'm talking about Brazil, which is the reality that I know, and some other countries and other cities, they are very unequal. The state, they should provide basic services, and especially urban services, and a certain state of welfare that you see here in Europe, many cities, most cities. But the reality is that that doesn't happen. And if I had the opportunity to show you the case of the urban park, for instance, what happened with that case was that the municipality decided that that model of urban park that should be taken as a model of a new way of making urban parks, because what we have in Rio is that the state, because of corruption and very recent things that have happened, which I'm personally embarrassed about, but you might have heard in the news, especially here in Portugal, the state is completely bankrupt. So it's a matter of reality. Like, they don't have the money to invest in it. So if the option is that the people, they are not going to have any opportunities and they are not going to have access to anything, if the other case is that they're going to go after it because they have like this power and this willingness to have the access, and they're going to do it by themselves, I think that that shows the strength of these people to go after it. It doesn't take the responsibility of the government. They should be doing it and they should be held responsible. But I think these people, they should be congratulated, you know what I mean? So that's the research, it needs to be made visible so that they should get the funding and the support so that they can continue to do these actions, because the main problem that we have seen is that usually these initiatives, they come to an end because they don't have the funding. And so, just, I'm sorry to be, the thing about the tactical urbanism, my problem is with the concept and the idea of taking the concept from one place, like from Europe or from the United States, and applying it from one place to another, assuming that the problems in one place are the same as the other. So that is my problem with taking an author like Jan Gehl and his ideas of in a place like Copenhagen and thinking that that's okay to assume that that's perfect for Rio, you know? I think that that's outrageous, but we as professors, we take these references and we teach our students that. And we do that in Brazil, and we do that in Colombia, and that's a big problem, and we should be talking about this at these conferences.
I'd direct my question also to Claudia and carry on from this discussion, because I think it's deeply important, the question of these spaces, how they can move from pure cultural spaces to turn into spaces for political organisation, and the process of true radical urban change, societal change, because I think that is what's happening. But then in Brazil's context, how that is an obvious threat to the established order since the coup in 2016, and since the coup, has there been a greater attack of these spaces, including funding, to eliminate them? As we see with the assassination of Marielle 99 days ago.
I think the biggest problem, you're talking about the coup as the presidential thing, right? The biggest problem, I'm sorry, just for the people who don't know, he's referring to the coup as the impeachment of our former president, which a lot of people think was illegal, and so some of us refer to it as a coup. The biggest problem was that there was, before, in the former government and the government before that, with President Lula, there was so much funding for culture that these groups, they could have this continuing action. And now, with the new government, they don't have the support. So because they don't have the support, they don't have the tools to make their projects work. So just to give you an example, it's going to be too long. I'll give you an example later at the conference dinner to give you that. But I think there is no like direct action, like it's not a dictatorship. They're not going to go, no, you can't do that because it's a democracy. But they will indirectly cut, these actions by taking away the support and the funding which had been given before. And that can be more prejudicial sometimes.
We have time for one question more.
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you very much for the presentations. My question is for Claudia about the Nocturnal City. I found your presentation fascinating, and I would like to hear more about how you choose these listening points. But, well, maybe we can talk about that later. But my question now is about, you presented two cases, that we can call like progressive kind of soundscapes, and how do they relate to more popular or low-income soundscapes or listening points or parties? I mean, these other sounds or that happen at night that are part of the city, and if, did you register them? Did you consider them, and how can we look at them in comparison to these other more progressive activities at night?
Okay. Thanks for the question. Yes, there is a progressive, what you call progressive or fashionable spaces in nocturnal, more fashionable or trendy spaces in a nocturnal city, and popular also. And and that's why I consider the street so relevant, because it's in the street that all kind of cultures cross and interact, and there is intersubjectivity, and there is space for contact and conflict in the streets. So the groups and the cultures, at least in the street, pass by each other. One of my conclusions is that the nocturnal city has a guest list also. So some places are made for some people. There is a difference of places, but there are particular publics, from popular to elitist ones, that are in that places. So we have this thing of contact and conflict that it's important in the nocturnal city, and particularly in the street. I don't know if you want to, I answer, or I can develop more outside.
So guys, thank you very much for your presence here now. And we are going to pass to the next session, is the tactical urban tourism. And I want to ask you for some clapping for these people.
Yeah.